My brother's destination wedding in Cancun was supposed to be the happiest week of my family's year. I know that because my mother had been calling it the happiest week of our family's year since February, every single time she called me, which was often enough that I started recognizing the exact pause before she said it, that little breath she took, like she was about to announce something holy. I didn't go. I told them I couldn't get the time off work. That was half true. I'm a paralegal at a mid-size firm in Columbus, Ohio, and we were 3 weeks out from a filing deadline on a contract dispute that had been dragging since the previous spring. But if I'm being honest with myself, and I've had a lot of time to be honest with myself since all of this happened, I could have arranged it. I could have asked. I didn't ask because I didn't want to go, and I didn't want to go because I'd met my brother's fiancée exactly twice, and both times she looked at me like I was a stain on a carpet she didn't choose. Her name was Vanessa. She was 26, worked in real estate marketing, and had a way of tilting her head slightly when she spoke to you that made everything she said sound like a correction. My brother, who is 31 and has the emotional range of a golden retriever, thought she was brilliant. He'd known her for 4 months when he proposed. 4 months. I remember when he called to tell me. I was eating leftovers at my kitchen counter and I actually set down my fork. "That's really fast," I said, which is probably the most diplomatic thing I've ever said in my life. And he said, "When you know, you know." And I said, "Sure." And then I ate the rest of my dinner cold because I'd lost my appetite. The wedding was at an all-inclusive resort outside Cancun, the kind with a private beach and a swim-up bar and 6 different restaurants and nightly entertainment. Vanessa had sent a group text to the family in January with a link to the resort's website and the message, "This is where we're doing it. Book early for the best rooms, no question mark. No thoughts. Just a statement of fact. The way you'd announce a meeting had been rescheduled. My parents booked the presidential suite. I want you to sit with that for a second. My parents. My father, who retired early on a pension that barely covers their mortgage, and my mother, who works part-time at a dental office, booked the presidential suite at a resort in Mexico for 4 nights. When I asked my mother about it on the phone, she said, "We only have one son, sweetheart." Like that explained anything. Like that was a budget line item. I knew the numbers of my parents' life the way you know the weather in a city you grew up in. I'd been watching the forecast for years. They'd taken a second mortgage on their house in 2019 to help my brother pay off a car loan and a credit card he'd run up buying audio equipment for a podcast that lasted 11 episodes. They drained half their savings account the following year when the HVAC system died. By the time the wedding rolled around, they were stretched so thin you could almost see through them, and yet there they were, booking suites and acting like everything was fine. I declined the invite politely. I sent a gift, a nice one, a stand mixer from the registry, more than I could really afford, and I called my brother the week before and said I was sorry I couldn't make it and I hoped it was everything they wanted. He was distracted when I called. I could hear Vanessa in the background rattling off something about centerpieces, and he said, "Yeah, no worries." And that was pretty much it. I was not, for the record, jealous. I want to be clear about that because it's the thing people always assume when a family member skips a wedding. I didn't want to be there sipping cocktails on a beach, pretending to be thrilled. What I wanted was to not lie for 4 days straight, and staying home was the only honest option I had. So I stayed home, I worked, I ate dinner at a reasonable hour, I watched television, I went to bed at 10:30 on the Friday night of the rehearsal dinner and slept better than I had in weeks. I did not sleep well on Saturday. I woke up at 2:49 in the morning to a vibration. Then another. Then my phone lit up with the kind of continuous buzzing that means something has gone very wrong somewhere in the world that is connected to you. 38 missed calls. I sat up so fast I got dizzy. My eyes weren't even fully open. I squinted at the lock screen in the dark, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. My mother, 14 calls. My father, 11. My brother, 9. And then 4 calls from a number I didn't recognize with a 52 area code. 52. Mexico. I had 72 text messages. I didn't read them. I called my mother back and she picked up before it finished the first ring. Oh, thank God. Her voice was a pitch I hadn't heard since my grandfather's stroke. Oh, thank God, sweetheart, I've been calling for hours. Mom, what happened? Is someone hurt? Your brother. She broke off. I heard something in the background, a man's voice speaking rapidly in Spanish, and then my father saying something low and sharp that I couldn't make out. Your brother is in a room with resort security and the local police, and Vanessa is, I don't know, she's somewhere. She had some kind of episode. They're saying she needs medical evaluation. Mom, I turned on my bedside lamp. Start from the beginning. Slowly. She wasn't capable of slowly. What came out was jagged and out of order, and I had to piece it together in real time, the way I pieced together depositions. Here is what had actually happened. The wedding ceremony had gone fine. Or fine enough. My brother had cried, which apparently satisfied everyone. The reception started at 6 at one of the resort's outdoor pavilions, and by 9 o'clock things had begun to come apart. Vanessa's maid of honor had gotten into an argument with one of my brother's friends about something nobody could quite remember by the time I was hearing about it. Vanessa's father, who I had also never met, had apparently been drinking since noon and at some point made a comment to my mother that she described as deeply inappropriate, and I'm not repeating it. My brother, attempting to smooth things over, bought a round of shots for the entire table, which was 12 people, and then another round when that didn't work. At 11:15, Vanessa discovered that her new husband had charged $700 worth of drinks to their room on top of the already substantial bar tab from the open reception bar, and she had what my mother called a complete breakdown in the middle of the pavilion. She threw a champagne glass. It didn't hit anyone, but it shattered on the tile, and a resort employee called security. My brother was currently being spoken to by resort management about the cost of the glass. A piece of decorative lighting Vanessa had apparently also knocked over, and a chair that had been broken earlier in the evening under circumstances no one was willing to specify. Total estimated damages somewhere around $4,000. The resort wanted payment before they'd allow my brother's party to leave the area or access their rooms. My parents had already offered their credit cards. Both were declined. Dad has the investment account, I said. We can't access it from here. There's a hold. Then call the bank in the morning. They need it tonight. My mother's voice cracked. They're saying tonight, or they're involving the local authorities further, and your brother could be... They're saying he could be detained, sweetheart, and I don't know what that means here. I don't know how it works. Mom, I said. How much exactly? $4,200. But your father thinks if we explain $4,200. You have savings. You never touch your savings. Your father said you have at least. Dad went through my finances. Silence. The particular silence of someone who has said something they weren't supposed to say. Mom. My voice was very steady. I was a little surprised by how steady it was. How does Dad know what's in my savings account? He didn't. You mentioned once that you'd been saving and he made an estimate. He wasn't, wire us the money. My father's voice cut in. He'd taken the phone from her. His voice was tight and controlled in the way it got when he was frightened but didn't want to show it. We'll pay you back the moment we're home. I'll transfer it the same day. This is your brother's wedding night. He doesn't deserve to spend it in a room with security guards because he broke things and ran out of money, I said. That is not fair. Is it accurate? A long pause. Wire the money, he said again. I looked at my ceiling for a moment. The fan was going even though it wasn't that warm. I'd left it on out of habit. I need to check something, I said. I'll call you back in 10 minutes. We don't have 10. I hung up. I don't fully know what made me do it. Instinct, maybe. Or 3 years of handling legal documents that had taught me to verify before I act. Always, without exception, because the thing people are telling you and the thing that is actually true are not always the same thing. I opened my laptop. I went to my bank's portal first. Everything looked normal. Then I opened the credit monitoring app I'd set up 2 years ago after a coworker had her identity stolen through a data breach at a gym. I hadn't checked it in about 6 weeks. I opened it expecting to see nothing. There was an alert from 11 days ago that I'd missed because I'd had notifications turned off. New inquiry on my credit file. A personal line of credit, applied for online. $14,000. Approved. The IP address on the application was my parents' home address in Dayton. I sat there for a moment. Just sat there. My hands were on the keyboard and I wasn't doing anything with them. I clicked through to the details. The application had been submitted using my full legal name, my date of birth, my social security number, my current employer, my salary, accurate down to the dollar, and my home address. The credit line had been opened and a cash advance of $9,000 had been taken against it 8 days ago. I scrolled further. There was a second inquiry, a hotel booking guarantee, the presidential suite at the resort in Cancun, held against a credit card in my name that I did not own. The guarantee amount, $6,200. I put my phone face down on the bed. I am a paralegal. I have spent 4 years reading through documents that describe what people do to each other when they believe the stakes are high enough. Fraud, forgery, identity theft. I had read those words hundreds of times in the context of strangers, and I had never once imagined reading them in the context of my own family. I picked my phone back up and called my father. He answered immediately. "I'm doing it right now," he said before I could speak. He thought I was calling to confirm the wire transfer. "Just send the dad," I said, "who applied for the line of credit in my name." Complete silence. Not the silence of confusion. The silence of a person who has been caught. "I don't know what your 11 days ago, $14,000. Applied from your home IP address using my social security number." I kept my voice very flat. "And the presidential suite at the resort is being held against a card in my name that I didn't open. I have both alerts on my screen right now." I heard him exhale. It was a long, slow sound, like air going out of something. "We were going to pay it back," he said. "Before you ever saw it. The wedding gifts were supposed to cover everything, and then Vanessa's family was supposed to contribute for the venue, and it didn't come together the way we planned. You stole my identity. You used my social security number without my knowledge or consent to open a financial account in my name. That is identity theft, Dad. That is a federal crime. You're being dramatic." And there it was. The thing that would have worked on me once. You're being dramatic. The reset button they'd always pressed when I started to notice something they didn't want me to notice. I'd been dramatic when I pointed out they couldn't afford the second mortgage. I'd been dramatic when I said lending my brother money for the podcast was a bad idea. I'd been dramatic every single time I turned out to be right. "Put the resort representative on the phone," I said. "What?" "Whoever from the resort is there with you. Put them on." "Why would I?" "Because I'm not wiring any money and I need to speak to them directly. Put them on or I hang up right now." There was shuffling, murmured conversation in the background. A minute passed. Then a woman's voice, professional and tired because it was 3 a.m, her time too. "This is the duty manager. To whom am I speaking?" "My name is Rowan Callister," I said. "I'm calling from Columbus, Ohio. I understand there's a damages situation involving my family." "Yes, ma'am. We do need to resolve the matter before. I want to make sure you have accurate information," I said. The credit card being used as the presidential suite guarantee was opened fraudulently in my name without my authorization. I'm going to be reporting it to my bank's fraud department within the hour and disputing all charges. I'd recommend you not rely on it as a valid payment source. A pause. "I see. The people in your care are responsible for the damages in your pavilion, and they are the ones who need to arrange payment. I'm sorry you're dealing with this. It's not your fault." "Understood, Miss Callister. Thank you for letting us know." I heard my father in the background, his voice rising, saying my name, and then the call transferred back to him and he was already talking before the phone reached his ear. "What did you just do? What did you just do? Do you understand what you just did to your brother?" "I told the truth," I said. "They're going to call the police. They're going to. Rowan, your brother is going to be arrested on his wedding night. Then he should have thought about that before he broke their property. We are your family." His voice broke on the last word. Genuinely broke, and for a second the guilt hit me the way it always did, that old reflex trained into me over decades, that said fix it, smooth it over, keep the peace. I felt it, and I let it pass through me, and I did not act on it. "I'm calling the fraud department now," I said. "Don't contact me again tonight." I hung up. I called my bank's fraud line. I was on hold for 6 minutes, and then I spoke to a representative named, I remember this because it struck me as very calming in the circumstances, Thomas, who had a measured, unhurried voice and walked me through each step without once making me feel like any of this was my fault. I disputed the line of credit. I disputed the hotel guarantee. I put a freeze on my credit at all three bureaus. Thomas told me to expect a follow-up call within one business day and gave me a case number. It was 4:23 in the morning by the time I finished. My phone had vibrated continuously throughout the call. I turned it face up when I was done and looked at the notifications. My mother, 6 more calls, 11 texts. My father, 4 calls. My brother, 2 calls and a text that said seriously. My aunt, who lives in Cincinnati and apparently had been called by my mother to serve as reinforcement, 3 texts that escalated in outrage with each one. I read them all. I wanted to know exactly what I was dealing with. The consensus was that I was selfish, vindictive, jealous, and had ruined my brother's wedding night out of spite. One of my aunt's texts said, and I am quoting directly, "Your mother is hysterical. This is on you." I put my phone down, went to the kitchen, and made myself a cup of tea. I don't usually drink tea, but I had a box of it from when I'd had a bad cold in October, and I didn't want coffee at 4 in the morning. I stood at the kitchen counter and drank it and watched the dark outside my window start to shift, just slightly, toward the blue-gray of early morning. I thought about my brother's face when he'd called to tell me about the engagement. That golden retriever excitement. I thought about my mother saying we only have one son, like it was an explanation for everything, every decision, every dollar spent, every line crossed. I thought about the fact that they had my social security number memorized or written down somewhere, and that at no point had any of them considered that using it might constitute a crime. Or maybe they had considered it and decided I would cover it. That. I would always cover it. I went back to bed just before 5. I didn't sleep, but I lay there in the quiet of my apartment with the fan running and the city starting to make its low morning sounds outside, and I felt something that took me a little while to identify. It wasn't relief, exactly. Relief implies a threat has passed. This wasn't over. There would be calls from the bank, possibly from law enforcement, paperwork, disputes, months of unpleasantness. My credit report now had a fraud case attached to it. My family was in a foreign country dealing with resort security and possibly worse, and while that was entirely the result of their own choices, I would still be receiving calls about it for the foreseeable future. What I felt was more like clarity, the particular cold water clarity of a thing that has been soft and uncertain, suddenly becoming solid and defined. I had spent a long time believing that being a good daughter meant absorbing consequences, means filling gaps. Means being the person who didn't make a fuss and didn't cost anything and was always available when someone needed something fixed. I had confused that for love. I had confused their need for my resources with their need for me. I got up at 7 and went for a run. First one in weeks. It was cold and the sidewalks were still wet from rain the night before, and I ran 4 miles without stopping. When I got back, I showered, made real coffee, and sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and started drafting an email to a family law attorney I'd found once in passing and bookmarked without knowing why. My phone rang while I was writing. Not family this time, a Columbus area code I didn't recognize. I answered it. It was a detective with the Columbus Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit. Apparently, my bank's fraud report had triggered an automatic referral. She asked me a series of questions in a calm, methodical way, and I answered all of them truthfully and completely, including the part about the IP address and the part about my father confirming on a recorded call that he had used my information without my knowledge. She told me that depending on the situation in Mexico, there might be coordinated involvement with federal agencies given the international nature of the transaction, and that I should expect further contact. I thanked her and went back to my email. 6 weeks later, my brother and his wife returned to the United States with a civil judgment against them from the resort for the damages, which they were required to pay as a condition of leaving Mexico. The total, after the fraudulent card guarantee was removed from the picture, was paid using money my aunt wired them because no one else had any left. My parents were not charged criminally. The detective I'd spoken to told me that because I was a family member, prosecution was unlikely unless I pushed for it, and that the credit line would be closed and discharged as fraud without my liability. My credit score dipped briefly and then recovered. The fraudulent card was closed. The $9,000 in cash advances was absorbed by the bank's fraud coverage after a 2-month review. I did not push for charges. I want to be honest about why. It wasn't forgiveness exactly. It wasn't because I believed they hadn't known what they were doing. It was because I had sat with a detective and answered questions about my parents committing a federal crime, and I had understood in that room that I could choose how far this went. I could push and it would go very far. Or I could let the financial consequences land without the criminal ones and rebuild my life without that particular weight attached to it. I chose the second thing. For me, not for them. My mother called once, about a month after everything settled. She didn't apologize, not exactly. She said she hoped I understood how much pressure they'd been under and that she hoped someday I'd see it from their perspective. I told her I understood the pressure perfectly, that I'd been watching it build for years, and that understanding it and absorbing it were two different things. She cried. I told her I loved her and I'd be in touch when I was ready, and I ended the call. I haven't talked to my brother since. He sent me a text in November that said, I think we need to have a conversation, and I replied, I agree, and neither of us followed up. Someday we will. I'm not ready yet. What I am is fine, genuinely fine, not the kind of fine that means I'm holding something at arm's length and calling it processed. I go to work. I run 4 miles 3 times a week now. I've been saving again, which feels good in a way it didn't before, like something that belongs to me rather than a resource sitting in a jar someone else has a key to. My apartment is quiet. I paid for every inch of it myself. Last Sunday, I made waffles at 10 in the morning and ate them standing at the kitchen counter reading a book, and I noticed, mid-page, that I hadn't checked my phone in 2 hours. That was new. It used to buzz constantly, the undertow of someone always needing something. The silence took some getting used to. I'm used to it now. It costs exactly what I decided it was worth, not a dollar more. I've thought a lot about the moment I opened that credit monitoring app. It wasn't traumatic. I was sitting on my bed at 3 in the morning in an oversized t-shirt, squinting at a laptop screen, and what I felt wasn't fury. Not yet. It was something quieter and colder, like the air pressure changing before a storm. The number on the screen was $14,000. The IP address was my parents' house. And I just sat there for a moment, holding that information, letting it become real. Here's what I've come to understand about that night. Nothing that happened was sudden. Every piece of it had been building for years, decision by decision, each one small enough to excuse on its own. My parents had borrowed against their house. My brother had run up debts someone else eventually absorbed. I had paid and covered and stayed quiet because that's what keeping the peace looked like in our family. And because I kept absorbing the consequences, no one ever had to face them. That's not a judgment, it's just cause and effect. When one person consistently removes the cost of bad choices, the bad choices continue. It really is that simple. What I didn't expect was how clearly I'd be able to see it once I stopped. I think about Rowan from 2 years ago, the version of me who would have wired the $4,200 at 3 in the morning and told herself it was love. She would have done it. She would have been furious and exhausted, and she would have done it anyway because she had confused being needed with being valued, and she had confused paying for things with belonging. That version of me had a lot of intelligence she wasn't applying to herself. She could spot a weak argument in a legal document from 50 feet away and couldn't see the same pattern in her own family's behavior. That's the thing about intelligence. It doesn't automatically turn inward. You have to decide to use it on your own life. You have to be willing to look at the people you love and see them accurately, not charitably, not harshly, but accurately. My parents are people who made a series of escalating choices because they believed I would cover the gap. That belief wasn't random. I had spent years making it reasonable. And when I didn't, when I picked up that phone and spoke to the duty manager and then the fraud line and then the detective, something shifted permanently. Not because I was brave in some dramatic way. I wasn't shaking with righteous anger, I was just tired. Tired in the bone-deep way that comes from finally understanding that no amount of money was going to fix what was actually broken. And that the only person I could genuinely protect was myself. That's the thing they don't tell you about holding a boundary. It doesn't feel triumphant in the moment. It feels like loss. Because it is loss. I lost the version of my family I'd been pretending existed. I lost the story I told myself about what my loyalty meant to them. That's real, and I'm not going to dress it up as something clean. What I gained was simpler. I gained a credit report that belongs to me. I gained mornings where I don't check my phone the second I wake up, bracing for the next emergency. I gained a savings account that feels like mine rather than a shared resource someone else has a claim on. None of those things are small. All of them required me to stop doing the one thing that had felt, for a very long time, like the only way to be a good daughter. Thomas from the fraud line had an unhurried voice at 4 in the morning. I think about that sometimes. The world does not end when you stop absorbing other people's consequences. Someone else picks up the phone. Someone else figures it out. They are capable of more than you've been allowing them to be, and so are you.